Hello, my name is Elena Chiochetti and I am a researcher at the Institute for Applied Linguistics at Eurac Research. My domains of specialization are terminology, specialized translation, language planning and multilingual communication in general. In this video, I will give you some insights into language use in South Tyrol. First, we will address the evolution and distribution of language groups. Then we'll see the rules for language use in the public and in the private domain. And finally, I will give you some insights into minority language development. So, talking about the evolution of language groups in South Tyrol, having a look at the last 100 years, we see that the proportion of the different language groups changed over time. Now, before World War I, South Tyrol was a part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the population living in today's area of South Tyrol was mainly German-speaking. After World War I, when South Tyrol became a part of Italy, a massive internal migration of Italian speakers changed the proportion of the two major language groups. The Italian-speaking group grew rapidly until the 1970s, more or less, reaching its peak of about 1/3 of the local population in the 1960s and then declined slightly. Now, these massive migration of majority language speakers is an experience that also other minority language communities had in the past, in Spain, for example. The third local language group, the Ladin-speaking group, today about 4.5% of the local population, had a more stable development over time in the last 100 years. And finally, in the recent decades, we saw a rapid increase of people having other languages, so coming from other areas of Europe and of the world and speaking other languages. These demographic developments, together with legal and political developments, obviously changed how languages are used in South Tyrol, or were used in South Tyrol over time. Another important aspect concerning language use in South Tyrol is the distribution of language groups. Now, the German-speaking population, today about 300,000 speakers, is distributed well over the entire area of South Tyrol. But especially in the peripheral valleys and in the smaller villages, the local population might be to 95 or even 98% German-speaking, while the Italian-speaking population, due to work opportunities and migration flows, concentrates in the biggest centers. So today in the capital city, 3 out of 4 of the residents are Italian speakers. This means in practice that it is much more likely to hear someone speak South Tyrolean German in a rural village, whereas it is more likely for you to be addressed in Italian if you are in the capital city. If you want to hear people speak Ladin, you should probably go to the 2 Ladin valleys of Gardena and Badia, 2 alpine valleys in the Dolomites, where about 20,000 speakers live. Now, you can imagine that this is another situation where an ancient minority language survived in a rather secluded area. Now, let's address the rules for language use in South Tyrol. And whenever we talk about language use in South Tyrol, we must clearly distinguish between language use in the public domain and language use in the private domain. And when I refer to the public domain, I mean the local administration, the judiciary, private companies having a concession to provide public services such as transport or electricity supply. And then I will also address, obviously, the education system. So while there are official rules for language use in the public domain, there are none in the private domain. And this is one important difference. In 1972, with the second Statute of Autonomy, German was officially recognized as local level next to the national language Italian. This means that today in South Tyrol the use of German and Italian is based on what we call a personal principle, because every citizen is free to choose whether to address the public administration, the judiciary, and private companies providing public services in Italian or German. There are specific rules, for example, for certain types of text, like laws or identity documents. Italian and German must be present and printed side by side, and the text must have the same font size. The use of Latin, on the contrary, is based on a territorial principle. This means that Latin can be used with the municipalities in the two Latin valleys and with some offices dealing predominantly or exclusively with issues regarding the Latin population, for instance the Latin school board, which are outside this specific Latin-speaking area. There are two main codified variants of Latin, Gardena and Padiot, which are used alternately for local legislation and by the local municipalities. Let's now see the judiciary system. Now you can imagine how important it is for the parties in a court proceeding and for their legal counsels to be able to express themselves in the language they are more comfortable with. It is an essential aspect of non-discrimination of the minority community because it puts them at the same level as the majority language speakers. So in South Tyrol, court proceedings can be held either in Italian or German. And this is an example of what we call separate language use. We have seen before an example of joint language use when the languages are used together in legislation. So, trials either in Italian or German, bilingual trials are possible, but normally the parties are encouraged to agree on one language to speed up proceedings. Witnesses and parties can always be heard in their native local language, and the language can be changed once every instance. When the public administration is involved in a trial, it always being multilingual and officially multilingual, it always adapts to the language chosen by the other party. There are also specific rules for criminal proceedings. In that case, the suspect or accused must be asked as soon as possible for their mother tongue, which then becomes the language of the proceeding. Now, if the suspect is not present or does not respond, the authorities proceed in their presumed language, which again can be changed once every instance. Latin can be used only with justices of the peace. Official place names in South Tyrol are systematically bilingual or trilingual in the Latin valleys. However, there is ongoing debate today where the feature names, such as names for small rivulets, woods or gorges, should be systematically multilingual because in practice they are often known in one language only. Talking about the education system now, the Statute of Autonomy conferred primary and secondary competences concerning school administration and teaching. So we have 3 different school boards in South Tyrol, 1 for every language group, and 3 different school models. Now the Italian and German school models are basically monolingual school models, which means that German or Italian respectively are used as a main medium of instruction for most of the subjects, whereas the other language is taught as a second language with a rather high number of hours per week. The third model, on the contrary, is a different model, is the Ladin model, which is a so-called parithetic model. The two major languages, German and Italian, are used to an equal degree, so for the same amount of hours, to teach the different subjects, while Ladin is taught as a language for about 2 hours per week. There are some interesting recent developments in South European schools. The Italian schools in particular are trying to increase the number of hours of German to allow their children to achieve a better competence in the second, in this case, minority language. And there are also many projects trying to better accommodate the growing multilingualism of the pupils at school. So there are not only Italian, German and Latin speakers, but more and more children who have different native languages, and this calls for quite some efforts on the part of the administration and the teaching staff, which needs to be prepared to face an increasingly multilingual school. Now to the private domain. As I said before, there are no specific rules for the use of languages in the private domain. This means that families, friends, and the private companies, but also the private media, are free to choose their language or languages of communication. One notable aspect of communication in South Tyrol is the widespread use of the South Tyrolean German dialects, which are used in informal communication, but also on semi-formal occasion, and in casual writing, for instance, on social media. At school and on printed media, standard German is the norm. The Italian-speaking population uses standard Italian both when speaking and when writing, whereas the Latin-speaking population uses the local dialects of the two main codified Latin variants. And in addition, there are many other languages. Foreign citizens living in South Tyrol come from over 130 different countries originally. Many of them come from Austria and Germany, so they're German speakers. But there are many others speaking other languages, coming from Albania, Morocco, Pakistan, Romania, and they obviously speak their native languages too. So basically many people living in South Tyrol, actually most of them, are multilingual to different degrees. So using loan words or code switching, code mixing, again in informal speech, but also in casual writing, is not uncommon. The private companies in South Tyrol are multilingual, I would say, according to needs. So being multilingual is obviously considered a competitive advantage. And speaking German gives access to a huge foreign market. Germany, Austria and Switzerland today are the main export markets for South Tyrolean goods. However, while the bigger international companies face internationalization and globalization quite well and are fully and proficiently multilingual, the smaller, the micro companies located in South Tyrol might have local customers only. In practice, this means that if you remember the distribution of language groups I told you before in South Tyrol, let's say a local cleaning company based in the capital city might have local customers only, so communicate predominantly or exclusively in Italian with their customers. Whereas a carpenter residing in a rural village probably will have local customers only too, so he or she will probably use the local South Tyrolean German dialect when speaking and standard German when writing. This means simply that not all South Tyrolean companies are systematically and fully multilingual. There are no rules or particular incentives or supports for the companies to use the minority language as there might be in Catalonia or in Wales, for example. And finally, a couple of words on the private media. We have a quite notable amount of local media. There are daily newspapers in Italian and German. There is a popular weekly newspaper in Ladin. There's magazines also in the minority language, news broadcasts and TV broadcasts in all minority languages regularly. Radio stations plentiful, and in the recent decades we've also seen some, especially online media, which have gone multilingual. So there are some online news sites which use either of the languages. So finally, some words on minority language development. You have to consider that German is a minority language in South Tyrol, but it is a major European language and it is an official language abroad. In addition to that, it is a pluricentric language, so it is official language in more than one country. This means that the terminology and language development needs in South Tyrolean German will be different from other minority languages, which we might call absolute minority languages, like Basque or Ladin in our case. These minority languages, which are not official languages or national languages anywhere, need to develop their own specialized terminology in all domains of life. So from medicine to sports and from engineering to chemistry. Whereas South Tyrolean German normally can profit from the development of German in these domains abroad. Okay, so there is a great difference there. However, in 1972, when the second Statute of Autonomy was passed and German received official status in South Tyrol, there was one domain where there was a huge lack of terminology, and that was the legal domain. Obviously, everything in South Tyrol functions according to the rules of the Italian legal system. But legal language and legal terminology are very much system-bound, so they are very much linked to the legal system that produces the terminology. This means that you cannot simply steal Austrian and German terminology for use in South Tyrol, because without further research. Okay, so what we needed to do is some language and terminology planning. Okay, it was basically needed to fully implement the language rights established by the second Statute of Autonomy. Imagine that a member of the minority language community is not allowed to use their language in court because, for instance, you don't have the necessary terminology to discuss a criminal case, for example, in the minority language. Or imagine what it means that having to read the text in the majority language to understand what the administration is asking you to do, because the text in the minority language is unclear and inconsistent. Okay, so this language and terminology work was necessary to put language rights into practice. And to this end, a dedicated terminology commission consisting of legal experts, so judges and lawyers, and translators, so experts in language, was established in the early 1990s. Their task was to officially validate the South Tyrolean German designations that would express the concepts of the Italian legal system. Now, the work of the Commission was discontinued in 2012. However, terminology development work in South European German continues at Eurac Research. In the online information for legal terminology Bistro, you will find the South European German terminology together with the Italian legal terminology in relevant domains such as administrative law, criminal law, university law, and so on. There is also partly some Latin terminology, and you will find additional information, so definitions, context of use, and other information. But not only that. When we first started developing legal terminology, one of the fears that we had in South Tyrol is that our legal language would become excessively peculiar, so that German-speaking foreigners might not understand or misunderstand us. So one thing we started doing is a legal comparison for the development of South Tyrolean legal terminology. In practice, this means that for every concept, every term of the Italian system, we do make a search and legal comparison to see whether there are equivalent concepts in the German-speaking legal systems. So Austria, Germany, partly Switzerland, the EU level, and international law. Now, when there are equivalent concepts and when their designations fit our conceptual and linguistic systems, we tend to adopt the foreign terms for use in South Tyrol. And this type of information, legal comparative information, is also contained in Bistro. So this means that Bistro is a tool that helps not only and supports not only the development of the local legal language, but also is also a tool that supports international communication and supports the understanding between people living within the Italian legal system and people from foreign German-speaking legal systems. So, the South Tyrolean example, having seen all the aspects we have seen, can be considered a success story under many respects. However, there are also some lessons to be learned. It is important to plan ahead and start with capacity building as soon as possible to make sure that one can establish a properly functioning multilingual education system, for example, a properly working multilingual public administration and judiciary, for example. So, for instance, language and terminology planning need to start as soon as possible and be continued, so they need sufficient financial and human resources allocated to them, because they need to be because the minority community needs to make sure that they have enough terminology and enough words to express themselves at the same level of the majority community. So I hope you enjoyed this brief presentation today. From my part, Dankeschön, Dilan, grazie.